Hello friends, I am Dr. Kulkarni and this is the presentation dealing with questionnaire designing, and this is the part 1 of the presentation. The lesson objectives for part 1 of the presentation are that at the end of the part 1 of the presentation, the participant should be able to describe the types of the questions in a questionnaire, describe the types of the answer keys, and describe the strengths and weaknesses of each type of question. The lesson outline of the part 1 of the presentation includes 1. The goal of the questionnaire, 2. The types of the questions, 3. The types of the answer keys, and the fourth section would be advantages and disadvantages of the broad types of the questions. There are 4 goals of the questionnaire: validity, reliability, unbiased assessment, and discriminant assessment. A valid question measures the quantity or the concept that is supposed to be measured. So if the knowledge of the person is supposed to be measured with the question, it should measure the knowledge of the person and nothing else. If a question is for assessing the knowledge about the pathogenesis of the disease, then the question should assess the knowledge about the pathogenesis of disease and nothing else. If it measures something else, then it is not a valid question. A reliable question measures the quantity or the concept in a consistent and reproducible manner. So the results after the administration of the question should be consistent or reproducible over a period of time. If the results are not consistent over a period of time, then it is an unreliable question or questionnaire. The third goal of the questionnaire is that it should be unbiased. So unbiased question measures the quantity or the concept in a way that does not systematically under or overestimate the true value. The questions posed in a neutral way are unbiased. If, on the contrary, the person asking the question is himself or herself biased in some way or the other, then the question that will come out will not be an unbiased, but it will be a biased question. The discriminating question can distinguish adequately between the respondents for whom the underlying level of the quantity of the concept is present. The questions, for example, that are administered in an examination to the students, it is expected that the questions administered in a question paper for the students should discriminate between a good and an average student. If, on the contrary, if the questionnaire is such that all students get equal marks and it is not distinguishing or discriminating between a good and an average student, then this goal is not achieved by the questionnaire. There are two aspects of the validity. One is the content validity and second one is the construct validity. Content validity is also called as the logical validity. It is the extent to which a measure represents all the facets or domains of a given social construct. Social construct is nothing but the learning process. So the questionnaire should be such that it should cover all the domains of learning, that is the cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. For example, if the question assesses only affective dimension and not the behavioral dimension, then the questionnaire is defective in the content validity. The construct validity of a questionnaire is whether it measures what it is supposed to measure, and this we have already discussed when we were discussing the initial part of the goal of the questionnaire. Therefore, the construct validity is the core concept of the validity of a questionnaire. This slide shows the different types of the questions. There are two broad categories. One is the open-ended question and the second is the close-ended questions. And there are different types of the close-ended questions, that is the single response type, checklist type, the presence or absence type, the rating scale type, the linker type, and the rank order type. The open-ended questions are the questions that are followed by a space for answer. There is usually limitation of the words for the answer to be given by the respondent. So they are limited by the number of words. When there are many response categories like date of birth, then one should prefer the open-ended question. For example, if you want to know the dates of the birth of the class of the students, so there will be many dates of the birth and there will be many months of the birth. So many response categories will be there. And in such cases, one can ask an open-ended question as to what is your date of birth. Another reason why open-ended question could be selected is that the investigator does not want to impose the categories. The investigator himself or herself wants that the question should be open-ended. So in these two situations, the open-ended questions will be preferred. This is an example of the open-ended question. State the one important improvement you would like in this workshop or in this lecture series or presentation. And there is then space for giving the answer. You can see that the space is limited by 3 lines only. And another limitation imposed is that the person posing the question has asked for only one important improvement. So you may have in your mind more than one, or the respondent may have more than one improvement in his or her mind regarding the workshop or regarding the lecture presentation. But the person posing the question has asked for only one important improvement, and that too it has to be mentioned in 3 lines only. So that's the peculiarity of the open-ended question, that there is a question and there is a space, and this is usually limited by the words. The limited space is given for giving the response for the open-ended question. One should minimize the number of the open-ended questions in a questionnaire because they are difficult to code and analyze. When the questionnaire is given to a large number of individuals, one would like to analyze them. The open-ended questions are more difficult than the closed-ended question as far as the analysis is concerned. And they are also likely to show inconsistent response. The response may not be the one which is expected. In the previous question, for example, we had asked the person to give only one reason. The person may start giving 2 or 3 reasons. Person may say that the workshop was okay, but some other aspect of the workshop or the lecture series may be commented on. So that is an inconsistent response, that what is expected from the answer and the respondent is deviating from the expectation. So such thing is likely to occur. They are also likely to be left blank. If the person responding feels that the question is difficult, or the person feels that the question is inconvenient for answering, then the space given below is likely to be left blank. Then it is likely to decrease the response rate due to its effect of the speed. If there are too many open-ended questions, because open-ended questions require writing on the part of the respondent, and that takes time. So if there are too many open-ended questions, the respondent may feel that it is taking much time and he or she may not be able to complete the questionnaire. This especially happens in examination. If there are many open-ended questions, the person may feel that it is taking time, and that may affect the quality of the answers as far as the open-ended questions are concerned. In closed-ended question, the question is followed by limited options. So the number of options could be 2 to 5. And the respondent has to select one or more option. And depending on whether he is allowed one option or more than one option, the questions may differ and the type of the question may differ. Such types of the questions, that is the closed-ended questions which have got limited options, are easy to code and analyze, and therefore when there are large number of individuals participating or responding to the question, then the closed-ended questions are preferred. And there are different types of the closed-ended questions, and we will discuss them one by one. The single correct response type is the most popular type of closed-ended question. Here the question is followed by the options, and the respondent has to select only one option. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 options, but the respondent has got the freedom of choosing only one of the options that are given. The method indicating the selection may be different. Like for example, the selection may be shown by putting a checkbox, uh, putting a cross in the checkbox, or making a sign of correct opposite to the question. So that may be different, and these we will discuss later on. But the crux of the thing is that the single correct response type has many options, but the respondent has to select only one of the many options that are given. Here is the example of the single correct response type of question, closed-ended question. Do you have diabetes? So this is the question, and the options to this question could be the person may be knowing that yes, he has got diabetes, he may be taking treatment for diabetes, and he may say yes. The person may be definitely knowing that he doesn't have diabetes. He might have tested a few days back, and then his or her answer will be no. And if these two are not possible, then the person may say, I don't know. He may not be knowing for sure whether he is suffering from diabetes or not. So here are the three options, and the respondent is free to make only one of the three choices. So this is a single correct response type of closed-ended question. A checklist type of question is like any checklist. So there is a question and it is followed by a list, and you have to check the appropriate item. In this question, for example, which of the following drugs you have consumed in the last week, and check if you have. So the person who has posed this question expects you to check against the item which you have consumed in the last week. So if you have consumed an anti-diabetic, you check against anti-diabetic over here. If you have consumed anti-hypertensive also, you check over here. If you have not consumed any antacid, then you do not check against this item. If you have not consumed antibiotic, you do not check against this item. Apart from these four, if you have taken any other medicine, there is a provision, any other specify, and you have to check against that item. So if you have taken any, say, anti-anemic drug, you mention that you have taken anti-anemic and you check against it. If you have consumed any other item which is not in this list, you check against that item after writing it over here. So checklist type of research question is nothing but a question followed by the list, and you have to check the item that is appropriate for according to the question. Then rating scale type question. In this question, there is a question and the response is in the form of pre-structured rating. This is a pre-structured rating and it is in the form of text. The rating is in the form of text. Always, sometimes, and never is in the form of text. And this question is, did you use protective footwear during these activities in the last week? And the activities are over there. So there are multiple activities over there, and these are called as the components of the question. So there are multiple components of the question, and the response is in the form of pre-structured rating, and which is in the label or in the form of text. So if you have used the protective footwear always during walking, you check in this box. If you have never used, you check in this box. So accordingly, one checks against in the appropriate box, and that will be the appropriate response for the question. So in this scale, in this type of question, the rating scale is there, which is a pre-structured rating, and it is in the form of text. Then yes no type of question, the response is in the form of yes or no. There could be more than one components, but it is not a necessary thing. The important thing is that the response is in the form of yes or no, and one checks on the yes if the response is yes. One checks on no if the response is in the form of no. The question may have therefore one or more of the components which is yes or no. So the example is, do you know any diabetic person in any one or more of the categories given below? So the categories are the components in this case, and the components or the categories are your family, your relative, your friends, and the co-worker. And for each component or the category of the answer, the response is yes or no. So the basic essential thing in this type of question is that the response has to be yes or no. There could be more than one components, but that is not an essential criteria for yes no question. The essential criteria is that the response has to be in the form of yes or no. Then there is another way of rating, and that rating, which is a response of the respondent to the question, could be in the form of numeric form. It could be in the numeric form or in the form of number. In the previous question that we have discussed, the rating was in the form of text or in the form of label. Herein, in this, when the question is of numeric rating scale type, the rating, which is a response, is in the form of number. For example, in this question, rate this lecture on the scale given below, and the scale is 0 and 9, and explanation what does 0 means and what does 9 means is given. So one has to encircle 0 if you find that the lecture is not informative at all. One has to encircle 9 if you find this lecture as very informative, and in between one can have the scale of rating. So herein the response is in the form of rating, but it is in the form of numbers. In rank order type of question, there is a question followed by the atoms for which the ranking is expected. The respondent is asked to rank the atoms as per his or her choice. Here is an example. Here is the question, and here are the atoms to be ranked. The question is, rank order the atoms below for improvement in your hospital. And the items mentioned are cleanliness in the wards, cleanliness of the toilets, and behavior of the staff. And one has to rank these three atoms, and each atom will receive the ranking between 1 and 3, because the number of the atoms in this case is 3. So each atom will be given one of the ranks which is in between 1 and 3. The precautions in this type of question is that one has to keep the atoms to a minimum of 2 and 5, between 2 and 5. The atom should be more than 1 because the ranking will be irrelevant if the atom is only 1. And the atoms, if they are above 5, then there will be confusion in the mind of the respondent as to what rank and how the ranking is to be given, and the time will be wasted in ranking the question which has got more than 5 atoms. So in rank order type of question, there is a question followed by the atoms which are supposed to be ranked for that question. In linker type of question, the respondent answers the question or the options of the questions by giving pre-constructed ratings. And these are the pre-constructed ratings. These are not by the respondent, but these are given in the question itself. For example, in this question, hanging is an effective way of preventing the murder, and the ratings are between 1 to 9. And 1 would mean strongly disagree, and 9 would mean strongly agree. By convention, the ratings have a range of 1 to 9 only. And when the range is between 1 to 9 and the strongly disagree is rated as 1, and when strongly agree is rated as 9, it is called as linker type of rating. So by convention, the ratings have got a range between 1 to 9, and strongly agree component is kept on the right side. So the strongly agreed component is kept on the right side, and strongly disagree component is kept on the left side. And in between, if you have got the opinion in between, then you can choose an appropriate number. So that is the linker type wherein the response is in the form of a pre-constructed rating scale which has got a range of 1 to 9, and wherein 9 means strongly agree and 1 means strongly disagree, and the strongly disagree component is kept on the left and the strongly agree component is kept on the right side. So friends, that finishes with the common types of the questions in a questionnaire. Now let us discuss with the types of the answer keys. The answer key that is placed in front of you is called as baby format type of answer key. Here the question is followed by the response in the text format. So this is the question: do you currently smoke the cigarette? And the response is followed, the possible response could be yes or no. Then the response text is preceded by the square bracket. So this is the response text and it is preceded by the square bracket. Each possible response is preceded by the square bracket, and the respondent indicates the selection of response by the cross in the bracket. So if the response is no, the cross is made in this bracket because the response is no, and the bracket preceding it is crossed like this, like the one which is shown in your slide. So if the response on the contrary is yes, then this is not the response that is you are expected to do, and this is not the place where you are expected to place the cross. The cross will be placed against yes. So baby format, in short, is the format in which the question is followed by the response in the text format, the question followed by the response in the text format. The response text is preceded by the square bracket. Each response text is preceded by the square bracket, and the respondent indicates the selection of the response by cross in the appropriate box. The respondent shows the selection by placing the cross in the appropriate squared bracket. So that is the baby format of the type of the answer key. Then the next is the Dillman's format. Dillman's format is also useful for the fixed response type of question. The respondent in this there is the question and the responses are there in the text format. But these responses are preceded by the numbers. So 1 and 2, and these are called as the codes for this response. 1 and 2 are the code. 1 is the code for the response yes, and 2 is the code for the response no. And how does the respondent indicate the selection of the choice? He indicates the selection of the choice by making a circle against the appropriate option. So if in this case the selection is for this question, do you currently smoke the cigarette? My selection or the respondent selection is no. Then he doesn't encircle on the letter no or the word no, but the encirclement is made against the number 2. Here 1 and 2 are nothing but the numbers that help the data entry operator, and these are also called as the codes for the response. So for question number 8, for the response yes, the code is 1. For this question number 8 again, if the response is no, then the coding is 2. The data entry operator will not enter for the question number 8 the response as no, but it will be entered as 2, because for question number 8 the response entered in the computer is 2, because it is code for the response no, it will be inferred that the response by the respondent was no. If it is coded as 1 and it is entered as 1, then it will be interpreted as yes. So this makes the data entry very easy for the computer operator, that he is not supposed to make the entries yes and no and make the spelling mistakes every time, but he has to make the entry in the form of number only, and these numbers which are used in the answer keys are called as codes. And in the Dillman's type of the answer key, the codes precede the response in the form of the text. The Kranz type of answer key is similar to the Dillman's format. The Khan's type of is similar to the Dillman's format, and the only difference is that the serial numbers of the options are after the option of the text. In the previous one, the code 1 was before the option yes, code 2 was before the option no. Here the only difference is that the codes have appeared after the text of the specific response. For yes, the code was 1, it has appeared after yes, and for the no, the code was 2, it has appeared after the number 2. And herein also, I have to encircle this response to say that the respondent has to encircle this response to show that that is the selected response for that specific question. The Jackson's format is another type of format which is also very commonly used. And here the question is followed by the possible responses. So here is the question, and the question is which year you are in. So that is the question. And the responses are first MBBS, second MBBS, third MBBS, part 1 and third MBBS, part 2 are the responses. So each possible response is followed by the number, and the number is nothing but the code. We have seen that the numbers are used for coding, and they are for the data entry operator. And each number is possible response is followed by the number, and then it is followed by the square bracket. And the selection of the response by the respondent is to be indicated by placing the cross in the response. So if this is the response that the person is in second MBBS, then he has to make the cross. He doesn't encircle around the code, but he encircles in the bracket which is placed against the selected option. So that is the Jackson's format, which is in the form of the question followed by the options. Each option is followed by the code and by the bracket, and the bracket is for indicating the selection, and the selection is indicated by placing the cross in the bracket. Friends, in this section we will see the advantages and disadvantages of open-ended and close-ended questions. The advantages of open-ended questions include that in-depth analysis is possible in open-ended questions. The responses that are given by the respondents in open-ended questions are not restricted by the choices in the questions. There are open spaces. The respondent can express himself or herself in her own language. He or she can express the thoughts that are there in the response that is given to the questions. And because of that, the depth of the answers in the open-ended question, the range of the answers that is received in the open-ended question is more than that of the closed-ended questions, and because of which the in-depth analysis is possible in open-ended questions. The open-ended questions are very good for knowledge, attitude, and practices, because the open-ended questions leave many choices. The choice of the words, the choice of the language is left with the respondent, and that's why. And in the knowledge, attitude, and practices, the perception of the respondent is very important. The thought of the respondent is very important, and the perceptions and the thoughts can be expressed very well in the open-ended questions as compared to the closed-ended questions. And therefore, they are very good for knowledge, attitude, and practices types of the studies. One can get the unexpected answers. Sorry. One can get unexpected answers in the open-ended questions. Suppose there are only 4 choices in the closed-ended questions, and if there is a 5th choice possible, that cannot be expressed in the closed-ended questions. But such a restriction is not there in the open-ended questions, so unexpected responses, unexpected answers can be obtained in the open-ended questions, which are not possible in case of closed-ended questions, which are restricted in the questionnaire. The responses are restricted in the closed-ended questions. The advantages of the closed-ended questions are that they are easy to analyze and compare because there are limited choices. The computerization or the data entry is comparatively easy with the help of in the closed-ended questions because they are always coded. Most of the closed-ended questions will be coded. The responses will be coded, and the coded types of the responses are easy to analyze and compare. So because of this, the closed-ended questions are preferred for the large scale surveys. If the number of the respondents is very, very large, then the closed-ended questions are preferred. And that is the advantage of the closed-ended questions. The questionnaires can be filled easily by the respondents in the closed-ended questions, whereas the open-ended questions are difficult and time-consuming because the respondent has to write in the question and the responses have to be written in case of open-ended questions, but they are only to be selected and either the checking has to be done or crossing has to be done or encircling has to be done. So because of that, the questionnaire can be filled easily by the respondents in case of the closed-ended questions and not in the open-ended questions. As far as the disadvantages are concerned of the open-ended and closed-ended questions, let us see what are the disadvantages of the open-ended questions. The open-ended questions, they are time-consuming for the respondents as well as for the investigator. For the respondents, they are time-consuming because they have to write in their own words. They have to think and then write. So thinking process is there in the responses given. They have to write in their own language. They have to select their own words. And this is a time-consuming process for the respondents. As far as the investigators are concerned, the responses are very difficult to code because they are in the words of the respondents. The responses are in the words and the language of the respondents, and therefore they are very difficult to code, and that's why the analysis of the open-ended questions is time-consuming for the investigators also. Because they are very difficult for analysis because they are not coded, they are difficult for analysis, and therefore they are time-consuming for the investigator, and therefore there is difficulty in the comparisons of the questionnaires posed in different groups. The analysis and the comparison is difficult for the open-ended questions as compared to the closed-ended questions. The disadvantages of the closed-ended questions are that the in-depth analysis is not possible. The advantage is there with the open-ended questions, so that becomes the disadvantage with the closed-ended questions. There can be loss of information because we have got restricted options given in the questions for the responses. Suppose there are only 4 responses for the question and the respondent thinks that there is a 5th response possible and the 5th response is his or her response as far as that particular question is concerned. That cannot be given in the responses in the closed-ended questions if there are only 4 responses and the 5th response possible is impossible to be registered in closed-ended question. But that is not the difficulty with the open-ended question because the 5th response can be coded, can be given in the open-ended question in the form of the text by the respondent. So there can be loss of information because the restriction is imposed by the questions in case of closed-ended questions. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of the open-ended and closed-ended questions. So with this, we finish the part 1 of the study. You please see the part 2 also, and then only the description of the topic will be complete. Unless you see the part 2, it will not be complete. And this is my email ID. You can contact me at this email ID, drapkulkarni@gmail.com. If you have got any difficulty with reference to this topic, you can contact me at this address. Thank you very much, and I conclude the part 1 of the presentation over here.